Hi, you're listening to Sgt Dorsey Speaks podcast produced by the Get Global Network. Let's get to it. Wow, what a busy week. We have just on Sunday, a couple of days ago, celebrated, if you will, the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, that march across the Pettus Bridge and what that meant to black folks back then and what they were fighting for and what they were standing for and what they were rightfully demanding. And with all that I'm going to be reporting on that's occurred in just this last week, the question that begs to be answered is, what's changed? Not much. I mean, listen, just a couple of days ago, March 3rd, was the anniversary of the beating of Rodney King by 4 LAPD officers. And so, while that was captured on video and thought to be something new, something different from certainly anything we had seen, folks who, live in the hood understand that that kind of foolishness went on a regular basis. We just, for the first time, had the luxury of actually seeing it video recorded. And so now there's been a long line of recordings that have stood to corroborate and substantiate the lived experiences of black, brown, and poor white folks, yet nothing has changed. So what I'm talking about will reference my first story of the week, which is an update on Stephon Clark. Stephon Clark is a young man that was shot and killed in Sacramento on last year, and the prosecutor in that case has just announced with I think it was 96-page report that she's not going to file any charges against the police officers who basically murdered Stephon Clark. Now, listen, she went to great lengths, this district attorney, Annie Marie Schubert, in her declaration with regards to why the officers, according to them, feared for their lives and, in her words, acted lawfully under the circumstances. DA Schubert declared that the shooting was justified and therefore the officers were not going to be facing any criminal charges. Schubert said that the officers evidently articulated to her satisfactorily, clearly, that they believed that Stephon Clark was armed with a gun and that he was advancing toward the officers before they opened fire. Listen, if this is the new norm, if this is the standard by which officers are going to justifiably use deadly force, this is a bad precedent, you guys. The officers believed that Stephon had a gun, and so therefore they feared for their life and ultimately fired 20 rounds. And in the midst, it was reported in their firing of 20 rounds at this young man, they thought themselves that they had been shot. What kind of witchcraft is that? You're firing off rounds and you think you've been hit. One would think a professionally trained police officer might know whether or not they sustained a gunshot wound. I'm just saying, I've never been shot, but I would think that if someone did in fact shoot me, I would know that. And so these officers, in addition to everything else that they put forth as a reason for justifying this murder, was that they thought that they had been shot and that they thought that Stephon's cell phone, it was reported, was a gun. I mean, isn't that what, they're requiring of toy manufacturers now who continue to make toy guns, that they make them funny colors and stuff so folks know that if you see something lime green or neon pink or, cobalt blue, that it's not a gun, so you don't get to shoot it. You don't get to shoot that person because you see something pink in their hand and, oh, I thought it was a gun, and therefore, ollie ollie oxen free. It's all good. It's disgusting. It's disingenuous. It's dishonest. And for me, as a 20-year veteran of a premier law enforcement agency, and I believe LAPD to be that, I'm a little biased, but listen, I spent 20 years in a uniform. And, I say this over and over again in my 20 years. I worked in South Central LA. I worked South Bureau Crash, the gang detail, community resources against street hoodlums. I had folks run from me like Stephon did. I had folks, make me jump fences. Like Stephon probably sent these officers on that late night. And guess what? I didn't shoot a one. Not one of them did I shoot. Why? Because 9 times out of 10, there's no exigent circumstance that would require an officer to use deadly force, as in the case that we saw with Stephon Clark when he was running from the officers. There was an air unit overhead. I get that he ran behind a house and you don't know what he's doing, so freeze frame. Hold up. Request backup. What was the urgency for these officers to engage this young man? He ducked around a building, around a corner you can't see. Get in a position of advantage, take cover, take concealment, request backup, have the air unit direct responding officers to the location because the air unit is overhead and clearly has a better vantage point than the officers did down on the ground. So what was the urgency? There was none. There was none. And I'm offended that this district attorney and everybody else that was involved, the police, the sheriff there, or police chief, whoever heads that agency, the mayor, are all coming forward now and trying to shove this down our throat as if this was really, for real, something that had to happen. And therefore, these officers skate. And so listen, Sacramento, you need to know that what they just told all the officers up there in that part of town is that you can shoot a black man because you think he may be holding a gun in his hand, or because you think he just shot you. You can shoot a black man and get away with it up in Sacramento. So just know that, folks, and govern yourselves accordingly, right? I am so bothered by this. I had the opportunity, thank you to CNN International, the other day to appear on their news network and have this discussion with an attorney. And I love it when I have an opportunity to have a discussion, if you will, with a civilian who wants to debate with me about police training. Sir, as an attorney, I get that you prosecute cases, and I'm sure you're very good at that. And, I stay in my lane, and I would never talk to you about how you put on a court case. And so therefore, you don't get to talk to me about how police officers are trained and somehow try to convince me that an officer firing 20 rounds was justifiable. Listen, I know every police department is not trained the same way, but I believe by and large, most act and work pretty similar. And so based on my training, we're taught you fire 2 rounds in rapid succession and then you reassess the threat. You don't just empty your magazine because you just happen to have 15 rounds in it. So therefore you get to shoot all 15. Who trains police officers that way? No one. No one. And so Stephon Clark was shot at 20 times. I think he was hit 7 or 8. But he was shot at 20 times. I would imagine if these officers had the kind of ammunition and clips that bad guys have out there on the street, if they had a banana clip with 100 rounds, my God, they would have fired all 100. Not once did they stop to reassess the alleged threat that Stephon was posing. Not once did they even stop to try to figure out, did we hit him? Did he drop? Or if he dropped, they just kept shooting? I mean, what the? I am just bothered. I'm bothered as a woman, a mother. I'm bothered as a police officer, and I'm bothered as a police supervisor, someone who was required to review uses of force and make a determination about whether or not force that was used was justified. And I'm here to tell you that that was not justified. But nonetheless, it is what it is. And so, we see this every time it happens. A poor family is on TV, distraught, disgusted, confused, and hoping that this will be the last time that this happens. And we hear them say all the time, I don't want any other family to have to go through this. And of course, I believe them in their saying that. But guess what happens? Another family will go through this. And so the Clark family certainly we've had shootings since Stephon was shot and killed in 2000 and I believe it was 2017, 18, I'm not exactly sure. But nonetheless, there have been other police fatal shootings since then, and there will continue to be more. So for those of you who have an interest, if you want to see my discussion on CNN International, please do visit and subscribe my YouTube channel, Sgt Dorsey Speaks. You can find all of my local and international news interviews on my YouTube channel, Sgt Dorsey Speaks. You know, there was another time when I was on CNN, just real quick, kind of an aside, because of these civilians debating me. And I had this female civilian debating with me as we discussed a shooting that had occurred in, I think it was Riverside County. The sheriff's officers were chasing some guy who had stolen a horse. And it was a wide open field. The air unit was overhead. And you know what they did when they caught him? They got him up off this horse and then they put hands on him, because that's what happens when you run from the police and they catch you, right? So this lady is debating with me, and I forget, she was a psychologist or something. But anyway, she was debating with me because she said that was kind of a rarity, you know, that doesn't happen. They couldn't deny that it happened because the air unit caught it and they put it on the news, and these guys were putting in work. When I tell you they were putting in work, they were handing this guy his ass in this wide open field where they probably had tunnel vision locked in and didn't think anybody was really seeing what was going on. But unfortunately, the air unit was overhead, and I think a news chopper was overhead as well. And so it eventually all became known. But nonetheless, you know, this lady is debating with me that, you know, that doesn't happen and that was rare. And I had to remind this heifer that, you know, back up. She knew this to be true because she's been on a ride along. So I had to tell this heifer that I am, as a sergeant, the one who takes you on a ride along. And as a sergeant, I'm the one who determines what someone like her may or may not see, because I understand, you know, what you're likely to encounter when I take you to the end of a foot pursuit. And so therefore I get to make a determination as to whether or not I want you to be present for that ass handing that goes on at the end of a foot pursuit. And so this is the kind of foolishness that I deal with on a regular basis when I appear on some of these networks with civilians who seem to know more about police work, having attended no police academy, having been trained by no one, but maybe, you know, having gone on a ride along once or twice. So anyway, I digressed. Back to the DA on the Stephon Clark situation. So, you know, I suspect that what will happen is that eventually that police agency may, well, not the agency, because you understand it's the taxpayers in the city who are going to settle with that family at the end of the day. They have an attorney, and the attorney is going to be pursuing some kind of civil redress, if you will. You know, my guess is that they will do what every other city does when they kill somebody unnecessarily. They'll pay. They'll pay because there's seemingly funds set aside for these kinds of transgressions, if you will. They won't admit any wrongdoing because great deference is always given to the officer's version with regards to the necessity for the use of deadly force. And so they will pay. They will pay. My next news story takes us to Patrick County, Virginia. In this particular story, at the end of it, I'm going to have a call to action, because there's really something that you who hear me can do, particularly those of you who might live in Patrick County, Virginia, or nearby. There's a man by the name of Alex McNabb, and he is an EMT in Patrick County, Virginia, and he made national headlines a few months ago when it was learned that he has a podcast, and his podcast seems to be very popular among white supremacists. And that in his podcast, it was not uncommon for him to compare black people to chimpanzees, and he would relate stories of alleged mistreatment of patients in his position as an EMT in Patrick County, Virginia. So the way the story goes is that this McNabb has this podcast, and what he says is that these were fictional stories. It was just shtick. It was just part of his routine, and none of that stuff was true. Nonetheless, the administration placed him on leave, and they banned him from being a member of the JEB, Stewart Rescue Squad. That's the unit in which he was employed, where he worked as an EMT while referring to black folks as chimpanzees. Jeb Stewart Rescue Squad. Now, the health department ultimately investigated the allegations that were made against him based on his own admissions, if you will, in the midst of his podcast. But now it's being reported that they did not find any medical wrongdoing. There was one story that he mentioned in his podcast where he kind of joked and bragged about using an oversized needle on a small child, and I'm assuming the small child would have been a black child, for the sole purpose of causing additional pain to this young person. Used an oversized needle. Now, again, the state said they investigated and they couldn't find any wrongdoing, and so they have not revoked his medical license, which means that he can continue to work anywhere within the Commonwealth as an EMT. So, understanding that his podcast is classified the same as a neo-Nazi program and has now gone mainstream, and understanding that he has the support of alt-right organizations, it's very important for anyone who may be bothered by Mr. McNabb continuing to work as an EMT, make some telephone calls, write some letters, send some emails, send out some tweets to the person that I'm going to name for you at the end of this podcast. It's reported that part of the problem in adjudicating this thing in a different way administratively is that the state health investigators were focused only on the medical discrimination part of the case, and so therefore, again, they didn't find any medical wrongdoing. Now, was that by, is that protocol, or was that convenient for them to narrow their focus only on the medical discrimination as opposed to the other hateful things that he has purportedly said? I don't know. But nonetheless, he is able now, given that this investigation has concluded and basically exonerated him, to continue on as an EMT. And the concern is that given the support that he has from the alt-right and others who are also part of that squad, again, one has to wonder, is that how everybody gets down over there? Are there other EMTs who are like-minded in Patrick County who are racists and white supremacists that are working, that are harming children by using oversized needles, and that believe black folks are akin to chimpanzees? Is that what's going on over there at Patrick County Rescue Squad? I don't know. But listen, as frustrating, as angry as this story might be, none of those emotions really matter if you don't take some action. So here's what you need to do. You need to contact Ren Williams. That's W-R-E-N Williams. And he is the attorney for the Rescue Squad. And his telephone number is area code 276-694-2455. He also has a fax number of 276 area code 694-2877. And I'm kind of laughing to myself as I give out the fax number, because that's probably for the old school folks. I'm not sure that these millennials really understand or probably use a fax machine. But nonetheless, that's the telephone number for Ren Williams, attorney for the Rescue Squad. And he works at a law firm, Schneider and Williams, PC. So if you are bothered by Mr. McNabb potentially returning as an EMT over there in Patrick County, you might want to give Mr. Williams a telephone call. And so now back in the news, and this time maybe for the last time in terms of suffering any kind of a penalty, if you will, is Betty Shelby. Disgraced former Tulsa, Oklahoma police officer Betty Shelby, who was given the gift of resignation after she shot and killed Terrence Crutcher because his mere presence, remember, scared her more than anything ever in her life. And she was given that gift of resignation. She resigned from Tulsa PD. She went on to a neighboring, I think it was Rogers County Sheriff's Department, where she was working as a reserve deputy sheriff, because she so wants to kill a black man, some think, that she would do it for free as a reserve. But what that did do was give her credibility and allow her to then become accredited as a teacher of this foolishness, which you've heard me refer to before as how to get away with murder. So now we know that she's free and clear. She can teach how to get away with murder. She can be brought on full time with Rogers County Sheriff's Department if they so choose, because Betty Shelby will not be facing any federal civil rights charges in the fatal shooting of Terrence Crutcher. Evidently, the Department of Justice said that there was insufficient evidence to pursue any civil rights violations, and that they are closing the investigation. They do not believe that she willfully used unreasonable force, which in and of itself is insulting. I wanted to say laughable, but there's nothing funny about it because a man lost his life. But for them to say that she did not willfully use unreasonable force, it's offensive. This woman shot this man in the back as he walked with his hands up in the air because she said his mere presence scared her more than anything she has ever seen in her entire life. And somehow his failure to obey her commands was reasonable and justified when she shot him in the back in May of 2017. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. Just like in the Stephon Clark murder, Betty Shelby lives to offend again, and doesn't stop there. There's more. Here in California, Northern California, again, no criminal charges for the deputies involved in the Millbrae taser death of a black man by the name of Cheryl Dorsey. Hope I'm pronouncing his name correct. San Mateo County District Attorney Steve Wagglestaff said that the San Mateo County Sheriff's deputies who killed Cheryl Dorsey will not face any criminal charges. And, the story with Mr. Dorsey was that he was allegedly running in and out of traffic, and somehow the officers wanted to get his attention. They wanted to have a conversation with him, and he didn't want to talk to him, which, unless he's involved in some kind of criminality, that's his right to do. So he crossed the street to get away from the officers. Now, they said that he was running in and out of traffic. And so, I guess if you cross the street, some could say that that's running in and out of traffic. And, if an officer says it, then guess what? You were running in and out of traffic, because great deference is going to be given to the officer's version of events. And so they eventually caught up with him, and they wound up using a taser on him, and he died. So here we have again another unnecessary death, another unnecessary use of force based on why did you stop me in the first place? Manufactured probable cause, reasonable suspicion, investigative stop, whatever doublespeak code word the police want to use. They had no real reason to engage Mr. Dorsey, and he's dead. He's dead. And so they have an attorney, the family does, and they're going to pursue a civil case. And I'm sure when it gets to the DOJ, they'll do like they did in that other case and say that there was insufficient evidence to make them want to do anything more. So at some point, they may settle with the family of Mr. Dorsey as well. And listen, don't just take my word for it. You guys know what I'm talking about. You know that there seem to be endless streams of money available to cities to pay these families once they've killed your loved ones. And that's why I say when I speak to folks, comply and complain. And then, of course, I get, well, people comply and then they still get killed. Yes, you do. There's no guarantee. I make no promises that if you comply, that the police won't kill you anyway, because the unknown for me, the variable that I can never speak to is the officer who stops you. You know, maybe you might be stopped by an officer who's reasonable, who has good judgment, who's not overzealous, and you might survive. But we've seen so many instances where people don't come when the officers tell you to, when they don't step out of the car, when they don't get out of the street, when they don't turn around and submit to being handcuffed, when they don't put a cigarette out as they're sitting in their own car. Bad things happen. And so, just so that we're clear, in 2016, you remember Philando Castile, he was ultimately shot and killed because he was legally carrying a gun in a state that was open carry, and told the officer, "Hey officer, I have a gun on me. What do you want me to do?" And the officer shoots and kills him anyway over in Minnesota. Family got $2.9 million. Sam DuBose in 2015, who was stopped because he didn't have a front plate on his car by a university police officer who shouldn't have had his ass off campus, but did nonetheless, and stopped Sam DuBose and then shot and killed him. His family, the DuBose family, $4.8 million. Sandra Bland, $1.9 million. Freddie Gray ran from the police, ultimately was taken into custody. Something happened, we know, because he died a short time later. Family received $6.4 million. Walter Scott shot in the back 8 times because he ran from Michael Schlager. Family received $6.5 million. Akai Gurley in New York stepped into a stairwell in an apartment building where his girlfriend lived and scared the bejesus out of some rookie cop who never thought that maybe a tenant might be using the stairwell, shot and killed him. Family received $4.1 million. And then Laquan McDonald, family received $5 million. I mean, I could go on and on. Christian Taylor in 2015, $850,000 to his family. In 2014, the family of Eric Garner received $5.9 million. Mike Brown, $1.5 million. Here in Los Angeles, Ezell Ford, LAPD gang officers wanted to have a conversation with him. He didn't want to engage them. Something happened. Officers said he went for their gun. Great deference was given to their version. He was shot and killed. Family received $1.5 million. Tamir Rice, playing in a park, 12 years old. You know the story. Shot and killed. Family received $6 million. And then John Crawford, the young man, same month as Tamir Rice was shot and killed, was in a Walmart, picked up an air gun that was being sold in the Walmart. Police responded because some fool called and said there's a man loading a shotgun in the store. Police respond. No exigent circumstance, no emergency to engage him. Don't say anything. Just see him, shoot him, kill him. Family received $6 million. And oh, by the way, you know, there's another story related to John Crawford that you don't hear much about, and that is there was only one witness to that shooting, and that was his girlfriend. And guess what? A couple of months after John Crawford was shot and killed by those officers, this young lady was involved in a traffic collision in the middle of the day at 2 o'clock, allegedly in a car that was going about 90 miles an hour. In the middle of the day, she was killed in a car accident. So don't act like police departments won't kill you and pay your family money. This is why you need to comply. Because they do not have a problem making your family the next millionaire in your town long after you are gone. And so in the case of Mr. Kobe, the officer who tased him, Officer Wong, as well as the other deputies that were involved in that whole incident, because there were a bunch of people that were wrestling and grappling with him, John DeMartini, Elisa Lorenzotti, Brian Watt, and a sergeant by the name of David Wiedner. None of them will face any prosecution. None of them. You would think with all that manpower, if you will, all those officers, they couldn't just jump on him, lay on him, and keep him from running in and out of the street. Anyway, we just celebrated Bloody Sunday. Listen, it's almost like every day. If you're a black man, a black woman, and in some instances, a black child, every day could be bloody. On to the next story. There was a white police officer a few weeks ago who was a white police officer in Detroit, by the way, who had put up something on Snapchat, social media platform Snapchat, where he had forced a young black woman to walk in inclement weather. Well, that situation has been resolved now, and the police chief over there in Detroit, he's a former partner of mine, former colleague on the Los Angeles Police Department by the name of James Craig. Well, James Craig left LAPD and went on, I think he was a captain here, and went on to do great things, became the police chief in Detroit, which is his hometown. And so he very quickly was able to get to the bottom of that foolishness. Now, here's what happened. An officer by the name of Steele and Garrison first were suspended with pay on February the 4th. So this is very recent. So you see the kind of speed that a police chief can move with when they're motivated, right? Officer Steele and Garrison were suspended back on February the 4th when Steele posted a video on January the 29th of 2019 that showed a traffic stop over on Detroit's west side. Now, in that traffic stop, somehow something happened with the young lady and her car, and I don't know if it was that it wasn't registered. I don't know what caused them to make her get out of her car and walk, but nonetheless, they did. He thought it was cute. He, being Officer Steele, put it up on Snapchat and said something like, "This is what black magic looks like," as he made this young lady walk in the snow. It wasn't just that it was a little cold. It was snowing, or at least there was snow on the ground. And so for his trouble, he has now been fired. He's been fired. He wasn't given the gift of resignation. He was fired. So kudos to Police Chief James Craig over there in Detroit. Thank you, Chief Craig, for being an example and showing these other police chiefs how to get her done. On to police news in Minnesota. There was a jailer who has recently pled guilty. He was given the gift of resignation, and this was after there was camera video released that showed him beating a handcuffed black man as this black man was pleading for his life. So over in Minnesota right now, this 24-year-old by the name of Terrell James Johnson, he was arrested, I believe, for theft. And so we're talking about a misdemeanor, petty theft, right? He's arrested for petty theft. Officers take him into custody. They transport him to the jail, and somehow along the way, they decide to do a little, justice, a little street justice, a little punishment, a little tune-up, attitude adjustment, if you will, over there in Ramsey County. Now, they have a new sheriff by the name of Bob Fletcher, who released video of this incident. Now, this happened back in 2016 before Bob Fletcher was the sheriff, but now that he has been elected, he said this is not anything that he's going to tolerate. And so to that end, Correctional Officer Travis Vanderwill, who was hired in 2014, pled guilty to misdemeanor disorderly conduct, and he resigned last month. So now he had only been on that department for 2 years. He was hired in 2014. This happened in 2016, and he just resigned. So he's been given a gift of resignation. He's probably a young man and can, like Betty Shelby, live to offend again, go join another police department or another correction agency and, beat somebody else up. He's been sitting at home on paid administrative leave for the past 2 years, and so that in and of itself is not a bad gig because, listen, for the 2 years that he was sitting at home on paid administrative leave, what I want to know is, was he working anywhere else? Was he stacking his chips while he was getting paid to sit at home as they adjudicated this misconduct? I don't know. But nonetheless, he's gone. There was a big meeting that was held with regards to this whole situation over there in Ramsey County. And so, everybody sounds like they want to do the right thing. I absolutely believe that the sheriff does want to do the right thing. He did the right thing. County commissioners said that they want to do whatever it takes to make sure that this doesn't reoccur and that they take seriously, very seriously, they said, this incident and that they want to do everything to correct this situation. And so my only question then to Commissioner Victoria Reinhardt, who made that statement, she wants to do everything. My only question is, why did you allow this Deputy Vanderwill the opportunity to resign rather than have him be fired so that there is a paper trail as to exactly what he engaged in and why he is no longer with that agency. And one more. This is exhausting, but I mean, there's a lot going on, you guys, and so just bear with me. Hang in there. There's yet one more unnecessary use of deadly police force, and yet one more lie to try to cover it up. And this time, this is over in Palm Beach County. There was a young man by the name of Corey Jones who was shot and killed by a Palm Beach Gardens police officer by the name of Nauman Raj, Nouman, Raj, R-A-J. And the trial for former officer Raj has just started back on February 26 in West Palm Beach, Florida. And so here's what happened. In 2015, Raj was charged with the shooting of this stranded motorist who was named Corey Jones. He was 31 years old. And what happened is Corey Jones was having some car trouble. He had just he was a musician, and he had done a gig earlier that night and was stranded on the side of the road. I often say, you guys, poor tactics can lead to unnecessary use of deadly force. And this was clearly an example of poor tactics in the case of the murder of Corey Jones, 31 years old. This officer, Nauman Raja, was referred to as the trial began by the prosecutor as a reckless killer and an angel of death. He said he made a decision to shoot first and ask questions later. Now here's what was going on. Raja, who's 41 years old, was charged with manslaughter and culpable negligence and attempted first-degree murder in his encounter with Jones. Jones was 31 years old at the time. Raja had been working in a plainclothes capacity on some kind of a car burglary detail. Now, it's not clear from the article whether or not there were other officers on this detail. Was he by himself, or maybe were they in the vicinity and he didn't bother to get on his radio and let them know what he saw when he first encountered Corey Jones? But the way the article sounds is that this officer in plain clothes, oh, and by the way, this was like 3 o'clock in the morning. So he's in plain clothes at 3 o'clock in the morning. He sees Corey Jones stranded on the side of the road. He walks over to Corey Jones' car and he goes, "Hey, what's up? Are you good?" And there's an article that really breaks this all down, so you can certainly Google it and get kind of the timeline in the story with regards to Corey Jones. But anyway, so this officer sees him on the side of the road and he says, "Hey, are you good?" And so Corey's like, "Yeah, I'm good." And he asked him a couple of 2-3 different ways. "Are you good? Is everything okay? What's up?" And Corey is like, "Yeah, I'm good. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Why is this man messing with me and asking me all these questions?" And, he just came from a gig and he's got all of his equipment with him, which they said is very expensive. And he did carry a gun because he was concerned about being robbed and having somebody take his equipment. So thankfully, much like in the case of Walter Scott, thank God, Corey Jones had called for roadside assistance, and that call was recorded. And so this is how we know exactly what went on, because this officer Raja was all prepared to lie, much like Michael Schlager lied, but for that cell phone video when he pumped 8 rounds in Walter Scott's back, right? So Corey Jones had called for roadside assistance because he was, 3 o'clock in the morning and he needed some help. So there was audio. And in the audio from the roadside assistance, you can hear exactly what went on. You can hear the conversation, and then you ultimately hear shots fired. Well, Officer Raja knew he screwed up, right? He knew he messed up in a real way. And so he too now needed to create some kind of story, because remember, great deference is given to what an officer says. So after Raja gets into this shooting with Corey Jones, he calls 911, not knowing that there's another version of what really happened. And in his call to 911, after he's already shot and killed this young man, he's going through some kind of machinations and telling him to put the effing gun down, or "I'll effing shoot you," or something he's saying, none of which happened. Thank God for that roadside assistance audio. Thank God, because now we know. And because of that, for the first time, an officer who's on duty is facing trial for a fatal shooting over in Palm Beach County. This is the first time that this has happened in the last 25 years. So this is a big, big deal. And it looks like they're going to make an example out of this Officer Raja, not only for lying, but just, going above and beyond the duty to lie, to try to put forth a story that could not hold water, and to try to justify taking this young man's life when you can't justify it. There's no way that this young man should have been shot and killed. And so, trial just started. I'll be following the trial and reporting as more information is made available. And so, now is time, you guys, for Did You Know? Ooh-wee. I want to end this week on a happy note. As we end Black History Month, did you know that there was a 21-year-old young man, black man, by the name of Jewel Jones, who is the youngest politician to ever be elected to office in Michigan? Jewel Jones is a University of Michigan Dearborn student, and he's representing more than 60,000 constituents in the 11th District of the Michigan House of Representatives. Jones made history on November 8th in 2016 by becoming the youngest politician to ever be elected in the state of Michigan, and that was by a landslide. And before that, he had been the youngest state representative as a councilman over in Inkster. So, congratulations to Jewel Jones over in Michigan. And now, on to March and Women's Month. Until next time, be good and be safe.
You have been listening to the Sgt Dorsey Speaks podcast, produced by the Get Global Network. Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey is a television commentator, social justice advocate, and is also well known for her book, Black and Blue, Creation of a Social Advocate, an autobiography of her 20-year career as a black woman on the Los Angeles Police Department. The book details what she learned as an LAPD insider. Sergeant Dorsey can be contacted through her website, sgtdorseyspeaks.com, or via any of her social media sites like YouTube and Facebook. Take the time to subscribe to her YouTube channel and also subscribe to this podcast via major podcast networks like iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Podcast, and many others. The podcast is also available on wireless speaker systems like Alexa and Sonos.